There will be no more windmills. They are driving the whales crazy. The Gulf of Mexico will become the Gulf of America, and he might use military force to acquire the Panama Canal and Greenland, and indeed economic force to annex Canada to the US. Yes, we have just had the first Donald Trump press conference of the year, and what a one it was. Welcome to 2025 and another year of Talking Politics USA. Hello and welcome to our first edition of Talking Politics USA of 2025. It's been a frenetic start to the year in the US with the horrific New Year's Day attack in New Orleans, the morning of President Jimmy Carter, and a giant winter storm wreaking havoc. But news coverage here in the UK has in large part been driven by another development stateside, Elon Musk's newfound, and one might argue slightly puzzling, obsession with British politics. He appears to have taken a sudden and keen interest in historical grooming gang scandals, accusing Sir Keir Starmer of being complicit in the rape of Britain, and saying he and the safeguarding minister Jess Phillips should be in jail. He's even turned on his former friend Nigel Farage for not supporting the far-right activist Tommy Robinson, all of which has presented a headache, to put it mildly, for both the British government and Reform UK. But it also raised another question. How will the Trump administration handle Elon Musk? Well, I'm joined for today's episode by Dan Rivers, alongside the former Trump administration official Heather Nauert, and also Brett O'Donnell with us for the first time, who's a Republican strategist and veteran debate coach for the likes of George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, and even one Boris Johnson. Brett, boy, that's a whole separate podcast, probably talking about debate coaching for Boris Johnson. Welcome. I mean, you probably, Brett, let's start with you, since we'll welcome you to the podcast for the first time, and then maybe I'll ask all of you. I presume you watched the Trump press conference, which we've just had, or got some sense of it. I mean, boy, are we going to have an interesting few years. What did you make of it?
Well, it was classic Donald Trump. And for the folks who don't get Donald Trump and still refuse to get how Donald Trump operates, it'll make their heads explode. Because just as you summed up, you could take away renaming the Gulf of Mexico, using the military to seize Greenland and the Panama Canal, and annexing Canada. But none of those things are really going to happen. This is all part of the stagecraft and what I would consider the master negotiator that is Donald Trump. He's got goals in mind for each one of those situations, and I think that he is using hyperbole to start the bidding and try to get to the deal that he wants to get to. So I don't think that this should be unexpected to anyone who saw the last Trump administration. But in the end, what you'll see, I think, is a Trump administration that, one, will be much stronger on the world stage than we've had for the last 4 years, and one that'll be pretty successful on the world stage. I mean, look at the successes that the last Trump administration had, whether it's in the Middle East, in Europe, or with China, or all around the globe on the immigration front with Mexico. So I fully expect that this is the opening salvo of what would be the negotiations that Donald Trump is trying to get to in the art of the deal.
Heather, let's pick up with you. What do you think Donald Trump, if Brett's right, what is Donald Trump looking for here? What are the opening bids, and what is he actually looking for in each case?
Well, I think Brett is absolutely correct. These are the opening salvos, and watch out. This is the way that Donald Trump chooses to negotiate with different countries, and there's something that he wants out of each. For example, there's a big trade deficit between the United States and Canada. Trump wants to drive that down. He's big on talking about free and reciprocal trade, that our level must be equal with their level. And at this point, it's not equal. So I think that's one thing he wants out of Canada. Out of Mexico, of course, he wants to stop the flow of illegal drugs coming across the border, and also trade deficit as well. So I think if you look at some of those individually, then you can determine what exactly Trump wants to get. Another thing he talked about was NATO. And NATO members are supposed to hit this benchmark of 2% of gross domestic product spending on defense. There are a good number of countries that still aren't at that amount. Trump made some news today talking about how he believes that NATO countries should be closer to 5%. NATO members should be closer to 5%. But Trump isn't alone in that. There are Europeans who are approaching that amount. Poland, for example. Other countries and other leaders across Europe have indicated that they want to get much closer to that. So a lot of hyperbole, of course, but there are facts to back this up. And he's showing us a little bit of his playbook for what's to come ahead.
Dan, we arguably made the mistake in the last Trump administration, many of us in the media, of taking him too literally. I imagine there are quite a lot of heads exploding in media land in the middle of that press conference. Do you get the impression that the media is treating him differently second time around, or are we just, in the same cycle of repeat?
Well, to begin with, we seem to be in the same cycle of repeat in that I think a lot of the networks here are picking up things that he said and taking them at face value, where he said he's not going to rule out using the military to retake the Panama Canal. I mean, I was talking to Brett earlier. I don't think anyone would seriously suggest that they are going to deploy US troops to retake, the Panama Canal. I mean, Donald Trump himself has made a big play of not wanting to start any more foreign wars and not committing US troops abroad. So I don't think that's going to happen. But I think there's going to have to be a recalibration by the media of precisely how they treat these press conferences and how literally they take him, not taking him completely at face value, but getting to the idea that he is a disruptor. He is someone that wants to shake the tree and try and negotiate and sweep aside many of the kind of much of the international order, if you like, that has prevailed since the Second World War, and kind of start with a blank sheet again. And I think that plays to a lot of his base in the US that will be frankly a bit fed up. They feel that America is the policeman of the world, but is also, a lot of Western countries, particularly Europe, are taking advantage of that and not paying their fair share. Look, Donald Trump knows there's no way that NATO countries are going to get up to 5% on defence spending. But by putting that out there, that he might get them up to 2 or 3%. So it's, as Brett said, it's classic Donald Trump deal making, isn't it? You start with a kind of pretty outlandish idea or opening position, and then see where you end up at the end of it. I don't know what Brett thinks. Brett, do you think there's going to have to be a kind of bit of a reassessment with the way the likes of CNN cover these things, and MSNBC, two of the more kind of centrist / left-leaning networks in the US?
I think there will have to be, or they'll be out of business. I mean, their viewership has dropped substantially since the election. And if CNN in particular wants to stay in business, they're going to have to learn how to cover Donald Trump in a reasonable way, rather than every time he says something, have their particular presenter's head explode. And so, I think these networks will learn how to do this the second go around a little bit better. And to be quite honest with you, that realignment is really necessary. It's not just the way they cover Donald Trump, it's the way they cover the right altogether, in my opinion. And so I think that realignment would be healthy for all of the cable news networks.
Heather,
if I could just add, we've already started to see, not MSNBC, but CNN bring on more Republicans who have ties or former ties to the Trump administration or his team, because they recognize that their ratings are going down and they need to bring in that audience. Donald Trump won not just the popular vote, but also the electoral vote. And that's for a reason, because there are a good number of Americans who like him and like his policies. And CNN and others have to reflect that if they want to stay in business. I do want to mention one thing. As we're talking about possibly taking over by military force, the question that the reporter asked today, and this is important, a context is always important in reporting, would you use military or economic coercion? And that was the question that was asked of Trump. Would you rule that out? And Trump said no. So you cannot assume that Trump is looking at invading Mexico or any other country to try to force something. The question was military or economic, and economic is a tool that he uses very effectively to try to get a job done.
I want to talk about Elon Musk's influence on British politics, because we've talked of little else here the last few weeks. But before we do that, can I ask all of you, Heather, maybe we start with you. What is the state of relationships between Elon Musk and Donald Trump? And how does Donald Trump handle Elon Musk? Some people think fallout is inevitable. Some people think, well, maybe not. You know, Elon Musk is very useful for Donald Trump, not only in the White House, but potentially beyond it. How do you think that relationship's going?
Sure. I think it's clear they have a strong relationship. The president-elect would not have put him in charge of DOGE along with Vivek Ramaswamy if he did not have faith in him and if they did not have a strong relationship. Now, I know we're going to talk about Nigel Farage. I wanted to just point out that I noticed that he will be attending, and that was announced today, President Trump's inauguration. So I think the relationship is solid, and I think they can both be very useful to one another and bring creative ideas.
Brett, you want to pick up on that? How does Donald Trump handle Elon Musk? I see Elon Musk's fallen out with Steve Bannon already. I don't know what you make of that, but what do you make of Musk's position in MAGA world?
Remember that Donald Trump thrives on chaos, and he loves the back and forth. That's how he works himself to the solution that he wants to get to. And so I think he's got a great relationship with Elon Musk. I think he values his insight. I agree with Heather that he put him in charge of one of the most important projects. DOGE is its formal name, but really it's draining the swamp, which was one of the things that he campaigned on back in 2016. So I think that relationship will go fine. I'm sure that, Donald Trump has made this clear. He noted it in a prior press conference that he's the president. And I'm sure Elon respects that. And I think he values his input. Donald Trump likes outsiders because he is an outsider. He likes disruptors because he is a disruptor. And so I think he's willing to put up with some of the back and forth that to us on the outside might look like a strained relationship in order to get to the result that he's trying to get to.
Dan, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, cash has got to be a part of it as well, hasn't it? I mean, I don't know what the other two think, but Elon Musk is the world's richest man, and Donald Trump must be acutely aware of the financial power that he can bring to the party and generally to his family. So I think he would be very careful about making an enemy of Elon Musk anyway. I mean, how close they remain throughout this second term, we'll see. But all the signs at the moment is that he is completely sort of integrated in the inner circle of Donald Trump's world. I mean, we've seen him at various events at Mar-a-Lago. All reports are Elon Musk is sort of almost living part-time down in Palm Beach. So, it seems for now that relationship is very solid. Whether it endures to that level, I would question, especially given, the fairly tempestuous relationship Donald Trump has had with other people that have been close in his first term and then who ultimately turned against him. But we'll see. But I think money has got to be a critical part of why he might have pause to make an enemy of Elon Musk, because he's just got so much money and he's potentially so powerful.
Well, can I ask you about Elon Musk in the UK? And just to put a bit of context on it here, the debate has played out fairly forcefully here this week. And, Elon Musk has taken a sudden interest in, what happened with the Asian grooming gangs. And you've probably read about that. Feelings run very high here about that. He's been grievously insulting to Jess Phillips, one of Keir Starmer's ministers, who, like her or don't like her, has done a huge amount of work advocating for the victims of sexual violence, has, often sat with the victims of the grooming gangs herself. And Elon Musk called her a rape genocide apologist and said she and Keir Starmer should be in jail. Now, I think for a lot of people here, whatever they think of the issue, I don't think people like that. Anyone who knows anything about what Jess Phillips has done don't like a guy on the other side of the world suddenly hurling this extremely unpleasant abuse about an issue which he doesn't appear to know very much. Well, what do you make of that and its capacity to actually damage the UK-US relationship on quite a fundamental level? How does Trump handle that? How would you advise that Keir Starmer handles that? Dan, maybe let's start with you, but I'd love to hear from everyone. How do you think that plays out? how do you think both the administrations handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really delicate and potentially problematic issue. I mean, Elon Musk has got incredibly personal, as you alluded to there, with some of his comments. I mean, he's, just looking back over what he's tweeted over the past few weeks, he's called for Keir Starmer to effectively be imprisoned. He's called for America to liberate Britain from a tyrannical government. He's called Keir Starmer two-tier Keir, supposedly relating to his two-tier policing policy. He's talked about civil war being inevitable in the UK. So there's some pretty kind of inflammatory language, but I suppose I'd be interested to hear what the other two think about this. But do you apply the same rules to Elon Musk as you do to Donald Trump, and you don't take all of this at face value? He enjoys stirring up an argument, like nobody else, Elon Musk. And at the end of the day, this is driving a huge amount of traffic on the platform he owns, Twitter, now called X. So there is a kind of commercial imperative in all this that it's a great advert in some ways for his own platform, X, to sort of say, look what I'm saying on X, look at the kind of controversial comments, look at the arguments, the back and forth. But yeah, it does kind of slightly stick in the throat, doesn't it? Some of his choice of language, particularly sort of personal attacks on an issue, as you say, that arguably he doesn't have much of a grip on.
Heather, what do you make of it?
Let me jump in here. Yeah, as we talk about choice of language, let me just highlight some of Keir Starmer's cabinet ministers' comments about Donald Trump, calling him a neo-Nazi, a white supremacist, or I think the word was close to white nationalist. All of that kind of language has played out extensively on the part of senior members of the British government in power now. And so I have to think that it's a little bit rich to be criticized for Elon Musk, who's not even in government at this point. He is a private citizen making remarks about Nigel Farage or others. So I would just, ask you to keep that all in mind. There's been a lot of rhetoric that's been thrown around, but let's not forget some of the names that Donald Trump has been called by current members of your government, and that hurts the relationship between the United States and the UK.
Brett.
Yeah, I'll put my cards on the table. I worked very hard to try to keep Keir Starmer from becoming prime minister. I was on Rishi Sunak's team, but
it must have been a tough gig, Brett.
It was tough. It was tough but fun, and I admire Rishi very much. Look, Keir Starmer put himself in this position, as Heather just pointed out, some of the things that have been said, but also Keir Starmer sent representatives from his party to America to work on behalf of Kamala Harris. If that's not foreign election interference, I don't know what else is. And so I really feel like the first salvo in this was fired by Keir Starmer. And I think he's getting back now what he sowed on this front. And so, Keir Starmer is the one in a very uniquely bad position, because when he comes to the table with Donald Trump, he doesn't come as a partner and in the greatest alliance between America and Britain. He comes as a partisan who wanted the other side to win, but now has to deal with the side who actually did win. And so I don't really feel sorry for Keir Starmer in this situation. Elon Musk, I think, is doing what he has the right to do, and that is he's got a platform, he's got a big megaphone, and he's using it to call out Starmer. I know that some folks in Britain, I've watched the debate back and forth over this, and I know that's upset some folks in Britain, but I think they need to be reminded that Keir Starmer interfered in our election and did so very intentionally. And so I think now he is reaping what he sowed.
Well, I feel I have to come back at you both a little bit on this. That's not quite true. A couple of officials came over and campaigned for Kamala Harris. People have come over from different parties to campaign for US officials since time immemorial, and you all well know that. So I don't know how unusual it was, and I don't know how much.
They made a big deal about it. It wasn't like it was in the past, where folks came over and just worked. They made a very big point of inserting themselves into the election. And Keir Starmer, I was at the debate where he made some derogatory comments about Donald Trump in a prime minister debate with Rishi Sunak. So,
look, I'm not disputing with you that various members of the government, including Keir Starmer, have said very disobliging things about Donald Trump in the past. So let's just take the points that both of you have made on that. However, I would argue that we can normalise a lot of things. You can say, look, we the media have got to approach Trump differently. We've got to understand who he is. We've got to understand the way he negotiates. I sort of accept, a lot of that. I think there's food for thought in all of that. What I think a lot of people in this country struggle to accept is, Jess Phillips is a woman who has spent a lot of her life campaigning for the victims of sexual violence, has sat with the victims of grooming gangs, probably knows more about this subject than many people alive. And here is a very rich guy on the other side of the world calling her a rape genocide apologist. That, I would contest to you, most British people would find extremely offensive.
I'm not going to weigh in on all of the words that were allegedly used. I'm not familiar with that particular piece of what you're talking about. But what I can say, and going back to your comment earlier, that this is done all the time, where foreign governments often send their people over to volunteer to help out on other campaigns. One, it's actually pretty rare, but two, it's practically unheard of for a Harris campaign, the Democrat campaign, to be paying for British officials to come over and help out. And that is my understanding about exactly what happened. That is rarely, if ever, done. And that is one thing that sticks out about these volunteers who came over to advocate on behalf of Harris's campaign. Now, who this really hurts the British people. We've had a centuries-long relationship with the UK, of course, our closest ally, of course, and I believe that that will remain. But I think the government of Keir Starmer and others has hurt the relationship between the two parties as a result of this election interference, as Brett pointed out, but then also the name calling. Time to knock it off. And of course, turnabout is going to be fair play. I tend to think it's not right for people to do that and for people to talk like that, but that's the reality of what's happening now.
Heather, can I just jump in and ask? They talked
by the way,
about
one point, Dan, before you go, and that is, it's not just Elon Musk. Members of the Conservative Party and the Reform Party are calling for an investigation into the grooming gangs, and Labor rejects that. So if any of these charges aren't true, why not have the investigation?
But Brett, with the greatest respect to you, and I have the highest respect for you as a political operator, and I know you've been involved in British politics, but the Conservatives have been in power the last 14 years. They've been in power throughout the period in which this was happening. Yes, Keir Starmer was Director of Public Prosecutions, and we can have a long debate, probably not on this podcast, about the exact power that the Director of Public Prosecutions does and doesn't have. The Conservatives were in government. I feel like Elon Musk barging into this issue is a kind of sideshow to the kind of really grim reality of it and all the rest of it. But let's not get too far down that rabbit hole, because obviously, we may have different perspectives. Can I just ask you to kind of maybe round off, this is the one thing we can all agree is this administration is not going to be boring. It's going to be interesting. It's going to shake things up. Stuff is going to happen. Trump is going to be very powerful. We don't know what that power will be used for. Give us, as we go into this new 2025, Happy New Year to you all, by the way. What do you think what's in store for us? Let's go round clockwise. Dan, let's start with you, then Brett, then Heather. I'll let you finish up this podcast. Dan, you first.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting, aside from the kind of big broad brush geopolitical issues, is the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador here in Washington. Whether that goes through smoothly or not, I think there was a lot of kind of consternation among Trump's inner circle about that appointment, and how damaged the relationship is with the United Kingdom. We'll wait and see. But as Heather said, the UK and US are historically the closest of allies, and that special relationship that we always hear about is one I'm sure that will be analysed and picked over as we go into Trump 2.0. But I think all focus as we go forward will be on tariffs, on the tax cuts that are supposedly going to be coming through Congress, exactly how they're packaged up in this big, bold, beautiful bill, or whatever the term was that Donald Trump used today. But then on foreign policy, the Middle East, Ukraine particularly, and of course what he does about Iran as well. I think that's going to be one of the biggest, thorniest issues he has to face.
I agree with much of that. I think the 2025 is going to be a whirlwind. It will never lack for entertaining and interesting stories about the negotiations themselves. Donald Trump is an entertainer. But I also think that Donald Trump is approaching this presidency much differently than he did the first term. He understands the presidency. He understands its power. He understands how Washington works a lot better. And so, I think even though Republicans have a narrow majority, particularly in the House, I do think he's going to be able to get the bigger portions of his agenda through. And I think there'll be Democrats who jump on board with that because the American people overwhelmingly are in support of those, whether it's immigration reform or a tax cut package that extends his tax cuts in some form. I think that will pass. And then I think on the world stage, I think Dan is correct. Iran is the center of trouble in the Middle East, and how Donald Trump handles Iran will dictate whether or not he can get the peace deal with Saudi Arabia and Israel and achieve other successes in the Middle East. And I think that will have a huge impact across the globe.
And just to round it out, I really think that the mandate from the American voters this year will really go a long way to getting things done, not just in Congress, but getting things done internationally. He has that mandate and can get it done. And then, of course, the focus on tariffs, the focus on immigration, not just immigration issues here in the United States, but worldwide, because we've seen how it has had an impact throughout Europe and elsewhere. It's impacting all of us. So look for him to highlight that, and then trying to calm down the situation, just the fighting across the world, whether it's Israel provoked by Iran and other foes, or Russia, Ukraine, and elsewhere. You'll really see an emphasis on that as well. So this is going to be a very exciting year. Reporters are not going to be bored. Very different from the past 4 years with Joe Biden.
It's going to be a heck of a time to be in the news business. It's been a pleasure to chat to all of you. Heather and Dan, as always. Brett, thank you so much for taking the time. We've very much enjoyed having you. Thank you all. That's all we have time for this week. We'll be back next week with plenty more to talk about, as we've just been discussing. And as always, you can catch up our episodes on YouTube and ITVX, as well as listen on your favourite podcast platform. But for now, from all of us here on Talking Politics USA, it is Happy New Year once again, and goodbye.